Hi, welcome back to the Gem Hawks YouTube channel. I hope you're having a beautiful day and that the sun is shining for you. Today I want to share with you my slice of lime tutorial, which is this. I've used microfaceted 2.5mm peridot beads. They're an exquisite quality and it's just perfect for a slice of lime that you could have as an earring or a pendant or add to your own cocktail wall art. These first appeared in a mojito I made about 4 or 5 years ago now, which is wall art that hangs up in my house. So there's a slice of lime as well as a lovely mint leaf, which is pretty good fun to make actually. They're great fun to just sort of customize up. But for today, I want to show you specifically how to create your own citrus slice. Now you could go for a beautiful faceted citrine for your lemon, blood orange with some gorgeous garnets. The list of what you can make with them is really long. So I hope that you will join me now down at the board and learn how to create your own slice of summer. So here's a slightly closer look at the slice of lime design, which we're going to look at learning today. I've chosen to use microfaceted peridot. It's really beautifully vibrant in its colour and super sparkly. So this is approximately 2.5mm size beads. I'm going to show you, if you're using this size of beads, the size to use wire-wise. If you wanted to use larger beads or smaller beads, then you will need to make adjustments to the amount of wire you're using. This is where the original design stems from. It's a variation on a theme. This was made with little nuggets of peridot and some very pale now emerald. They were darker when they started out. And some Swarovski crystals as well. So that was the mojito from a few years ago now, but I'm going to make a second one like this and wear them as earrings. I think they're super cool, super fruity, really good fun. We're only going to be using 2 gauges of wire today, which is 18 gauge or 1mm. I'm going to work in silver plated copper, but obviously you can choose your colours accordingly. I'm also going to be using from my scrap pot some small lengths of 0.4 or 26mm gauge wire. That's really because the size of my beads, they're really quite small. If you wanted to size the whole thing up, then obviously you can use a slightly heavier wire, but probably not more than 0.5 or 24 gauge. You don't want it to get too chunky in there, otherwise you kind of lose the effect and the flexibility. So let's just have a quick look at those beads. I've loosened them off just there, and then we're going to start by grabbing a short length. This is around about 8 inches. This is actually from my scrap pot. So if I pop the slice of lime up in the corner for now, this is, as I say, around about 7 or 8 inches of the 1mm or 18 gauge wire. There's a small kink in this, which we're just going to solve like so. And what we're looking to do is to create a sealed capital D shape, the inner shape that we're going to be working with today. So I have a pot of Renaissance wax, which is going to help me get the basic shape. And I'm just going to form around that more than the half circle that you'll need. It's actually just slightly less than a half circle. A half circle doesn't quite look right. Most limes are not round, they're sort of almost oval and elongated. So I've gone for a slightly off circular in that shape, but I will show you as we go. Now, what I've done is I have measured for 2.5mm gemstones, which means that the upright on the D, that length will need to be about 45mm. You can take a still image of this if you need to refer back to it, and the distance from the upright to the outer side of the curved section is 20mm. So it would be slightly more than that if it was a perfect half circle. As I say, it's slightly narrower because limes tend to be slightly oval as opposed to completely round. In imperial, it's 1 3/4 inches top to bottom, and from the upright to the curved edge, it's about 3/4 of an inch. So I'll pop that back out for now. And again, this is your 18 gauge wire. So what I'm going to do is turn an upright at the bottom here and try to get a nice sharp bend on there. Now you could eyeball it if you want to, but if you are going to be working with 2.5mm size beads, this is the size that you would need to replicate. Also, if you wanted to make earrings, you probably want them to match. So what I would do is bring in the section that I have already prepared and try and match that as closely as possible. So the Renaissance pot is just slightly too large, but it gives you that lovely fluid shape to work with. And I've chosen to take an arc of that rather than a semicircle. So what I do want to do is get quite a nice straight upright on the backbone of the design. And I'm just going to very carefully bring that around until it sits where I want it to. So we do chop off a little bit of wire. There isn't a small amount of wastage, but these can always be turned into small coils and the such like. So once I'm happy with that form, I'm going to grip the curved section of wire and draw that back over on itself, like so. Before I'm just going to move this back out of the way so I don't knock it. I know that my shape and size is correct now, so I'm going to flip that on its side and trim away the residue just here. I broke my scrap pot the other day, so I'm just popping that to one side. And what I need to do is draw that wire over the back to seal in the upright section. So small movements and just drawing that down very, very carefully. When you get to this stage, you can see how much extra you might need to take away, making sure that you're only cutting the tail of that wire, not the beautiful arced section. So I'm just going to close that around so that that's really close to the beautiful curved section that we've worked on. Just going to pop that back on to make sure I haven't taken it out of shape at all. That looks pretty good to me. Pop that back up in the corner. And then I need to do the exact same thing just here. So any of your chain nose pliers, we're just going to turn this back as well, like so. Now you do need to be careful here, because what can happen as you turn this upright, it shrinks that back of the D down. So just make sure that that still is within a reasonable tolerance of your first section. Same thing again, we're going to draw this back down on itself. So what I tend to do is grip the upright section really firmly, and this will stop too much shape and size change from occurring. Just going to push that back parallel along to itself before we're trimming the residue end, not the main upright. I'm going to take that quite close this time. Flip it back over on its edge and then just draw that as neatly closed as you can. We do want that to be quite close because we're going to be wiring on with our finer gauge wire in just a second. So for each of these lime segments, I'm only using about 1/4 of a standard 15-inch strand. When you're buying 2.5mm gemstones, you do get a heck of a lot on a standard strand. So it's only about 1/4 of a strand for each piece, and I'm working solely with scraps from my scrap pot. So it is a really, really efficient way to use up shorter pieces of wire that you might have hanging around, especially if you want to use a precious metal and you may have shorter lengths that aren't quite up to doing larger projects. So before we create that outer frame, what we're going to do is fill this centre section with beads. So what I'm going to do is find one of my shorter lengths of scrap wire. So you literally can use just tiny little offcuts. This is about 5 inches in length, and this will probably do at least 2 segments. What I'm going to do is take a look at the design. This is going to be the back of the design where those cut ends sit flat on the wire bars, and this is going to be the front because it's just slightly more aesthetically pleasing. So what I'm going to do is, holding the front, I'm going to lay my finer gauge wire. Again, this is a scrap 0.4 or 26 gauge. I'm going to lay that over the top, and what I want to achieve are 3 wraps all the way around. So because it is scrappy, it's a little bit tense and tough, so I'm going to use my pliers rather than my hands to turn that around. And I laid a small amount over the end just so that I could easily draw the tail around rather than working too hard. So that's just about the right length for those 3 turns. And I just want to neaten that up so that it gets a really good grip. And what I'm going to do is push that coil all the way to the top of that upright capital D shape, and then just use my thumb to create an arc that sits just inside that curve shape that we've created, like so. So if I just hold this in position for a second and show you the ready prepared demonstration sample, what we're looking to do is to sit our beads on these arcs, and the numbers of beads go from 4 to 8 to 12 to 16. So it's your 4 times table because there are 4 segments, and we want to increase each segment up 1, 2, 3 and 4. So it's not terribly maths heavy, which is good to know. So hopefully you can see those wires against that bright background. If I just tilt them, you can see what we're looking to create. Now what you would need to do is put on your 16 beads and then draw the tail into position on the opposite side. So you're just going to make 4 small rainbows. If you prefer to start in the middle with 4, you absolutely can, but just remembering that it's 4, 8, 12 and 16 beads, and that will work with small 2.5mm beads in this kind of dimension. You would need to size up or size down and just play that by ear if you're working with very significantly different sized beads. So once you've loaded all of your beads on, they need to sit so they're not touching the outside frame, they're just inside. So you can see there's a gap between each of those rows. Once you get to the far end, now the reason I am not threading on these beads is this. I'm going to show you with one of them. My eyes are not too super good at finding holes in small beads, and what you don't want to do is watch me do this 16 times as I take that all the way over to the end. Now when you do get to the far end, you should have a small gap. There should be space, because we're going to need to add some more wire a little bit later on. So if you follow the dimension guidance, you should get at least enough space for a spare bead, which we're going to leave of naked wire. What you would then do is take that tail all the way around the upright section of that capital D shape. And the reason I'm pinching super hard with my non-dominant hand is to ensure we retain that gap. And I'm going to match and wrap 3 times on the far end, trimming away and then tidying that wire up at the rear. Just chasing that all the way around so that it sits neatly. And this is another reason, I'll show you on the back, that we don't want this turn to be too long. We want to be able to get that wire tidied away and still have that reasonably close to the end. So that's neat and tidy. Let's make sure that we still can fit those beads inside. That's a little bit tight at the top, so if that happens to you, you can just tighten that a little bit further down by twisting the coil of wire that you've created. So you would load 16, then 12, then 8 and then 4, getting gradually smaller, and I'll show you what that will look like once you've loaded all those beads on. Keep hold of your scraps because we now will need to add some more of those smaller sections of wire. So what I'm going to do now is take one of these tiny sections, and we've got a central bar which is clear. So we've got 3 wraps at either end of those small rainbows we've created, and those 3 wraps will all mirror each other as they go along, but there'll be a gap in the centre. So what we're going to do, bearing in mind this is the front, there's the back. So you can see you've got the sections which fold back on themselves on this side, and this is the pretty side. And you can see now there are the level of gap you need to be leaving at the end of those little rainbows of wire. So what I'm going to do is start by dividing it in half. So I'm going to take this tiny scrap of 0.4 or 26mm gauge wire, and I'm just going to hold that over the surface of the design, and I'm going to estimate what 3 wraps of the finer gauge wire will look like. So I'm going to pull that all the way around and wrap that as neatly and tidily as I can. Again, using your pliers will really help when you're working in a small situation like this. Give that a twist. And I'm just going to trim that very tiny bit off on the back, using the flush cut side of my cutters, like so, and taking that straight away to the scrap pot so it doesn't fall on the floor and end up in the bottom of my foot. So I'm just tightening that coil up, and this sits now in the centre. So what we need to do is take this tail, the end of your wire, make sure that you've divided in half the number of beads on the first section, the first rainbow, which has those 4 beads on. I'm going to draw that over the surface, and I'm going to post the end just over where the first rainbow comes. So it goes in between the first rainbow and the second rainbow, and that pulls all the way down. So you can see that's passed underneath from the bar to the first rainbow, and it needs to come back up again. Now what we're doing here is we are wrapping 0.4mm gauge with 0.4mm gauge, which means that you just need to proceed slowly and cautiously and not too heavy-handed. So what I've done is I've wrapped once around the first rainbow, like so. And if that isn't quite far enough along, you can just tighten that up slightly, or tighten it up from the other end if you need to, like so. And what you will then do is repeat that on the second rainbow and the third rainbow, always making sure that you are dividing in half as you move through. So I'll show you that one more time before we move on to how to add the outer edges, because you're going to repeat that at least once up the centre. But what I did on my demonstration piece was then subdivided each of those halves, so I have lime quarters. And it's just, you can see how the wire has gone over the surface, wrapped around the rainbow once, moved on to the next rainbow, wrapped once, next rainbow, wrapped once, next rainbow, and then it goes to the outside edge and has wrapped 3 times. So that's the process. I will show you one more time. It is fiddly, but not impossible. So if I move everything out of the way, what we need to do is check that we are halving those numbers of beads. So I need to have the 4 on the one side, sorry, the 3 on the one side, and then move on from there, because you're going for 2, 3, 4 and 5. So you just wrap around that central rainbow, pop the wire through, draw that to the end. You can pull that down underneath and then bring the wire back up and just tighten that through neatly, like so. Look what I've done. I can't count. I've gone for 3 instead of 4. I doubted myself and then did it wrong. So what we would do is push the wire back through. You can either cut this one off and start again, or you can test your wire to see how it looks. That's actually going to work quite nicely. So we're moving up from the first rainbow to the second rainbow, and instead of doubting myself, I'm going to divide that into 2. So there are now 4 on the one side and 4 on the other side. Maths never was my strong point. So that finer gauge wire is encircling the second rainbow. I'm just going to grab hold of that and pull it all the way around. And then we're going to count the next one, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like so. Divide your beads into half, encircle the next rainbow, so the tail goes down over the top of rainbow number 3, pulls that into position. The wire is going to come up between number 2 and number 3. I'm just going to guide that around until it sits where I want it to, like so. Just going to tighten that up slightly. Now the consideration is here that you should use the strongest wire you can that fits through your beads for those rainbows. These are super tiny, so I had to use 0.426 gauge, which is absolutely fine. You just need a delicate touch. So straightened that one up. Over the top, divide the next rainbow into 2 with those beads. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 on the other side. I'm going to take the tail around that 4th rainbow, so over the top, all the way around, back up from underneath, and just make sure that you're counting correctly. Note to self, before you finish that off. Now, if I was making this to sell, I would pull this finer gauge wire off and start again and count properly. So we can see the idea is that we're subdividing each of those sets of beads into 2 segments, and then you would subdivide again. So you'd have 2, which would be 1 in each section, 4, 2 in each section, 6, 3 in each section, and so on and so forth. When you get to the outside edge, I'm going to flip it over, and I'm just going to go 3 times around that outer frame. So that's once, twice, and that will be a 3rd time by eye. So I'm just going to trim away very, very carefully, making sure I don't trim the wrong bit. Get your scrap into your scrap pot, and then tighten up that coil at the end. Just need to give that a quick squeeze. And then make sure that you're happy with the aesthetics that you've got going on. So it's a case of following the same exact pathway, dividing each of those further into 2 segments. One of the reasons that I don't edit out the mistakes from my videos is to show that everybody makes them. Even people who've been making jewellery for a long time can sometimes have a moment and end up taking a wrong turn, counting the wrong number of beads, which is exactly what I did. If you feel that you have mangled your wire slightly too much, if you make a mistake, then go back 1 step at a time. You may be able to rescue your project, as I was able to do there. I've rescued most of the work that we've done so far today, especially all of that bead loading, which is not something I excel at. So we're going to move on to now making the outer framework and then how to attach the 2 together. So what I've done is I've just subdivided those other 2 halves and made them into quarters, and I'll just show you what that looks like now. So I've added in exactly the same technique another set of subdivisions. You obviously can take a little bit more time and get those angles absolutely perfect. What I might do is just gather up all of those small sections into the center so you get a more defined kind of diagonal line, and you can also just make very fine adjustments very carefully and respectfully of your gemstones or whatever beads you're choosing to use, and just get that to sit slightly more straight. So once you're happy, what we need to do next is create an outer framework for this design. Now, if you were making these as earrings, you have the option whether you want to have them to mirror each other or to be identical. If you're going to mirror, absolutely not a problem at all. You won't really notice the beginning and the end by the time we've added in the segment of outer. However, if you wanted to, you can just make the D a slightly different shape when you are at the very, very beginning. Honestly, it doesn't matter. It's not going to bother me in the slightest. So we're going to work now with some 1mm or 18 gauge wire. This again is an offcut from my scraps pot. I'm just going to give that a quick warm and make sure that those ends are neat and tidy. What I am going to do is try and create a wrapped loop which looks very similar to this one. So I'm going to estimate around 1.5 inches before I put a right angle bend on. And I'm going to find my round nose pliers, which temporarily disappeared, and I'm going to create a loop at the top there, like so, just trying to replicate the size as much as I can. That looks reasonably matched. Flatten that rounded shape down and just support that whilst you take the tail all the way around, the same number of times as you have done on your other one if you're trying to match them. Obviously, you might be making these for more than one person and want them to be exactly the same, or you may indeed just be looking to create earrings that have a very similar, sorry about that, that went out of shot for a second, a very similar kind of nature to them. Obviously, one is on one side of the head and one is on the other side of the head. It's not really as big a problem as you might think. I'm just going to smooth that end around slightly and make sure that I'm happy with that shape. What I need to do now is decide which way up my earrings are going to hang, whether I'm going to make an exact pair or a pair that is in opposite. And I think I'm going to make a pair that is in opposite, and then when we're at the end we can look and see how much difference it makes to have that closing loop at the top there. So what I need to do is to support that coil we've made just below the wrapped loop and pull that away in the direction that will encircle that arc that we created. Now I am going to use my Renaissance wax pot again, and what I'm going to do is grip that wrapped loop at the top and just chase the tail around. Now again, that will make you a nice half circle. We're looking for a slightly smaller slice, so you will need to just draw that down slightly and modify the shape as you go. what we're looking to do is create a very similar shape that sits just outside. That actually looks pretty good. And I'm just going to trim that away to around about 1/2 inch so it doesn't get in the way. Just going to leave that end. I've used the flush side, so that shouldn't cause any issues. Now for this next section, you need quite a long length of 0.4mm or 26 gauge wire. I'm again going to be working in silver plated copper, but what I will do is use an extensive length of new wire. I wouldn't use scraps for this because you do need it to be quite fluid. So I buy my silver plated copper and my raw copper on the reel in huge kilogram weights. So it's really very cost effective to use in this fashion, but it also means that when I need an extensive length of wire, I know that I've definitely got enough on my reel. So I've unspooled a good 18 inches in length or so here, and what I'm going to do is start by winding on to the outer framework. I'm going to lay the end of the wire over the top. I'm just going to trap that tail with my forearm because it's getting a little bit feisty. And what I'm going to do is try and wrap the same number of times as I did on the first side, which is about 5. So I'm going to take the tail around, give that a good 5 turns. And if you underestimate or overestimate, you can obviously trim away if there's too much, or you can add another coil if there's not enough. So we've got 4 turns there. So what I'm going to do is support that coil and bring that round one more time, pushing that neatly until it's super tidy. Now this is the face that's going to see the world. So what you need to do is try to cut the end to the other side that won't see the world. But before you get too ingrained in weaving everything together, just take a moment to smooth that around. So what I would normally do is move my hand with the pliers, but that's going to bodge the camera. So what you can also do is move the wire work. And what we're doing is rotating in the cut direction of that wire. And now it's nice and smooth, it doesn't stick up, and it's far less likely to catch on anything. So I've got my 5 wraps, and what I'm going to do is wrap 5 times around the outer frame and then once around both. 5 and 1, and do that many, many times. So there are 2 ways to add on to the frame that we've created that sits around the outside of the gemstones. What you can do is take the leading edge of this brand new wire, which is nice and soft and flexible, and push that down. So that will pop out the far side, and then you can bring that tail all the way through. What we need to do is not squeeze these 2 lines, the outer frame of your lime section and the external bit that we're adding. Don't crush them together. That needs to be nice and firm so that it won't be baggy and come undone. And it also needs to be all the way up at the top. Then we're going to go for 5 wraps around just this extra part. Now if I lift that slightly, I'm going to do it slowly, but once you've lifted that a little bit, it does make your life slightly easier. So that's 3, 4, and 5. Every time you've completed 5 wraps around the outer, we're going to tidy that little section up and make sure it sits neatly against your existing work. When you do it section by section, you stand a chance of it looking super neat all the way through. The alternative way of taking your wire into the framework is to find the very, very end, pop that inside, so between the outer gemstone rainbow and the framework, down it goes, pinch everything together and draw that through. So it's really what you're most comfortable with. And what we're looking to do is to keep that the same distance apart all the way around. And if you find that you need to make slight modifications to that shape as you move, it's absolutely not a problem. As long as you start with a decent rounded shape and you've warmed your wire to begin with, you should be able to make that happen. So that's 2 and 3 and 4 and 5, and then again you would give that a squeeze like so before taking the next section. So take the end through between rainbow number 4 and the outer frame of your lime, and then you continue all the way around until you get to the end. I'm 3/4 of the way around that woven section now, and what I want to show you how to do is where you added the wire that supports the little rainbows of beads, you wrapped 3 times around the outer framework of that D shape. Now that can be a little bit tricky to get past when you're weaving this together, so I just wanted to show you how to approach that area, which you'll need to do 3 times. So as you can see, we're just coming up on one of those subdivision pieces now. So I'm going to make sure that that coil is nice and tight and sits exactly where I want it to. And what you need to do is just very gently open out your external framework a little bit. Continue along as you were before. So that's 1 and 2. What we're not trying to do is to create a bulge in the wire. We just want it to be slightly open. 3, 4 and 5. Make sure that those coils are nice and tight. And then very, very carefully we're going to decide whether we want to take our double wrap before or after, and I think it will look better before. So I'm going to move that triple wrap over slightly. I'm going to pop the wire through, draw that all the way round. When I pinch this back together, I need to make sure that I'm not catching those 3 wraps on the outer frame of that D, like so. And just draw that gently back together. Support that and then continue on your way. So 1 and 2, 3, 4 and 5. Push those 5 coils up and then you're almost there. So you can see we've come all the way around to the end. I'm happy with how everything's sitting. So I'm going to finish with 5 last wraps. 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. Cut away that excess and then give that a squeeze. Make sure that's nice and tidy. Again, just rotating around in the direction of the cut end of the wire. And then what we're going to do is decide what we want to do with this tail. Now I think I'm just going to turn the wire backwards like so, and then bring that back up the frame, trimming off. So you've got just a tiny edge left, and then drawing that so that it sits next to the upright on the D before giving that a squeeze. Now to keep your wrapping pristine, what I tend to do once everything is absolutely set in its final position, I very, very, very gently just squish that all together. And then I think we are done. So they're reasonably well matched earrings, which I will add to a pair of ear hooks and possibly wear out at some point in the future. I hope you've enjoyed the slice of lime earrings, and I look forward to seeing you back here on the Gem Hawks YouTube channel again very soon. Take care and bye for now.